Hi friends! November is Native American Heritage Month, so in today's video I have a bunch of great book recommendations for you if you're looking to read something by an Indigenous author. I will also be sharing with you my TBR for Indigathon, a month-long readathon focusing on works by Indigenous authors being hosted by Michelle over at Thor Wants Another Letter and Bear from Etu Brody. I will link all of the information down below. With November being focused on Indigenous heritage, this is a great month to pick up some books by Indigenous authors that you haven't tried before. So I've pulled together a stack of books from my shelves by Indigenous authors that I love that I want to share with you guys. We've got some romance, we've got some horror, we've got some fantasy, hopefully a little bit of something for everyone. And since we're just coming out of October, let's start with horror. If you want to read some great horror by an Indigenous author, you should definitely check out Stephen Graham Jones. I really loved both of these books from him. You should know that he writes literary horror, so it tends to be more character driven. It's slower paced, but when things get going and things get gory, there's a lot of it. The Only Good Indians follows 4 young Blackfeet men who did something when they were young and now are being haunted and hunted by this elk-headed woman who might be a spirit or a demon or a ghost or... yeah, this is a really interesting one. Then My Heart is a Chainsaw is a love letter to slasher films. It follows a young woman who is obsessed with the slasher genre and is convinced that a slasher cycle is about to start up in her small town. Stephen Graham Jones is a member of the Blackfeet tribe. Really great if you're looking for some horror, you want to read from an Indigenous author. Both of these are awesome options. Next, let's talk fantasy. I have a YA fantasy. This is A Lots Away by Darcy Little Badger. Darcy Little Badger is an enrolled member of the Lipan Apache tribe. I really love this a lot. It's set in a world that's similar to our own, but with more magical elements to it, following an asexual teen girl as she tries to solve the mystery of her cousin's murder. This one has a mix of darker elements with almost like Scooby-Doo mystery solving vibes, so it's kind of an interesting mashup, but I really love this and I think it's well worth the read. One of my favorite books from 2020 was Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. She is mixed Indigenous and Black. This is a very fast-paced, intense adult fantasy title that draws on the civilizations of the pre-Columbian Americas. It also has one of the most intense opening scenes I've ever read, and it is a ride from there. I cannot wait for book 2, and I loved this. Lastly, a fantasy that is also a romance, and this will bridge us into my list of romance recommendations. You might try reading something from Scarlett St. Clair. This is the one book of hers that I currently own, and while this wasn't my favorite thing, a lot of people really love this. It's very popular. It's a steamy fantasy romance retelling of the Hades and Persephone myth that draws a lot on Greek mythology. It does have a bit of a fanfiction-y quality to it and can be kind of cheesy. It reads, the character reads a little bit young, so that's going to be hit or miss for some readers, but I don't think a lot of people know that this author is in fact Indigenous. And I believe in November her next book is coming out, which is the beginning of a new series. I'll put a picture of it right here. I heard her speak on a panel, and what's interesting is that she said that some of the things that happen in this story are inspired by her own experience of being biracial, Indigenous and white, and what that is like in terms of feeling like you have a foot in kind of 2 different places and maybe aren't enough for either side of your identity. So really interesting. It is a fantasy story and like a fantasy romance, but it's drawing on some of those experiences, and another option if you're looking to read from an Indigenous author. And for those who are wondering, this isn't like my great-grandmother was a Native American princess or something. Like, she's half Indigenous and an enrolled tribe member. I just can't remember which tribe, but she lives in Oklahoma. So yeah. Lastly, I have a stack of contemporary romances for you, and most of these are actually books that I read with Michelle from Thor Wants Another Letter for the Indigenous romance read-along that we've been doing throughout the year. So if you want to hear detailed thoughts on any of these books, you can check out the live shows for those. First is a YA title. This is Hearts Unbroken by Cynthia Latish Smith. This follows a teen girl dealing with a nasty breakup and working on her school paper to follow this story of parent backlash over this more inclusive approach to casting the Wizard of Oz musical that her school is putting on. And meanwhile, she also starts to fall for one of her colleagues on the paper. I really like this a lot. I think it's doing a lot of things. It's tackling a lot of big issues. I thought it was a really, really good book. And I haven't personally read anything else from this author, but Cynthia Latish Smith has a lot of books for children and teenagers, so you can check out some of her other backlist as well. Cynthia Latish Smith is a member of the Muskogee Creek Nation. My next book recommendation is Seducing His Secret Wife by Robin Covington. This is the second book in a Harlequin Desire line that she has, and they're just like fun, soapy, kind of steamy romances that you can read usually in about one sitting, like 1 or 2 sittings. Like I'll read this type of thing all in one sitting. There's another book in the series and hopefully we'll get more as well. And I like this book because it is that sort of fun soapy romance, but it also subtly weaves in things that are really relevant to the Indigenous American experience. This one follows a couple that meet in Las Vegas, have a steamy one-night stand, and get married, only to find out that she is the younger sister of his business partner, and things get very, very messy. So I really like this a lot. I think it's nice, short, sweet, does a good job. Robin Covington is biracial, Indigenous, and Black, similar to Rebecca Roanhorse, but I don't know particularly what tribe she's affiliated with. Next is a book that does have a romance, but it's more historical fiction. And I'm gonna give you a warning, this one is on the heavier side. This is not light and it has a lot of content warnings. So check my review on Goodreads if you wanna see some of those. But I do think there's a lot that's really powerful about this. This is Her Land, Her Love by Evangeline Parsons Yazzie. This author is from the Navajo Nation and it follows a Navajo family during the long walk. It gets really intense at times, but it also has this really beautiful portrait of love over time because it follows this couple who meet when they're young, get married, grow up together, have children together, and we see them love and support each other over years. So there's something really beautiful about the love story, but there is also a lot of trauma that takes place in here, so just kind of be aware of that. It draws on real history. My next recommendation is from a Canadian author. This is Sanctified by Maggie Blackbird. It is part of a series of books, but you can read it without having read the others. This one also deals with some hard-hitting issues, but it's quite steamy and has a great romance, although I'll let you know this is not a standalone. It is the first of 2 books that tell the story of this couple. This story is almost a Romeo and Juliet style star-crossed lover's tale. They're both Ojibwe, but our hero is from a Catholic family, but the heroine's family vehemently opposes the Catholic Church being allowed into their community and is all about reclaiming their original Indigenous spirituality. But the 2 of them fall for each other. I really loved this a lot. I think it's fantastic and definitely worth a read. My last recommendation from that read-along is Heartbeat Braves by Pamela Sanderson. This author is part of the Karuk tribe, and this one is about urban Native Americans, which I think is a really interesting take. It's a slow burn romance following this couple, but their work surrounds a community center set in a city that's intended to serve Indigenous people from a variety of different backgrounds who are living in that city. I really like this a lot, and I definitely plan to continue with the series. My final recommendation is a book that I just read in October. This is The Road Home by Christina Berry. Christina Berry is an enrolled member of the Cherokee tribe, and this one follows a Cherokee guy in a death metal band who has a lot of trauma in his past and ends up falling for a girl who's a roller derby skater. I love this a lot. It really came for my emotions by the end of it, and I was so rooting for this couple to be together. This is the kind of story where it starts out as a no strings attached, sex only situation, but then they start to catch feelings and have to be willing to let down their walls and be vulnerable and let love in. I love this a lot. I think it's fantastic and would definitely recommend. With that said, I'm briefly going to share the TBR that I've put together for Indigathon, and I hope you'll join me. I'll tell you what all of the prompts are and which books I'm using to fulfill those challenges. I'm not probably going to hit all of them, but I think I can hit most of them. Prompt number 1 is read the group book, and the group book is Apple in the Middle by Dawn Quigley. This is a YA coming of age story that does have quite a few content warnings, so check those if you need them. I am probably going to skip this one for now just because I don't feel like I'm in a place to add this book to my TBR given some of the content in it, but I hear it's wonderful and eventually I'm interested in reading it. Prompt number 2 is read a book with Indigenous joy. For this, I'm going to be reading Lovesick Braves by Pamela Sanderson. This is book 2 in the Crooked Rock series. I recommended book 1 to you earlier and I've been wanting to continue on. This one follows Esther and Theo's love story and I'm excited to read it. Also, there's going to be a live show for this with Michelle from Thor Wants Another Letter, and keep an eye on the channel for details on dates of when we're going to be discussing if you want to join us. Prompt 3 is read a host recommendation. For this, I'm going to be reading a poetry collection. This is Nature Poem by Tommy Pico, recommended by Bear. I was able to get the audiobook of this one from my library, and it will also fill prompt number 7, which is read an indigenous poetry collection. Prompt number 4 is read a nonfiction book, and I have a book that meets this and a few other of the prompts that has a nonfiction section to it. So once I read the other prompts, I'll tell you what it is. It also fits prompt number 5, which is land acknowledgement. Read a book by an indigenous author whose tribal lands you live on. If you're not sure what this is, there are maps available where you can check out your address and see which tribes originally lived where you live. Prompt number 6 is read a book with your favorite color on the cover. My favorite color is green, so you'll see how this fits. And prompt number 8 is read a book with an elder protagonist. So the final book on my TBR fits all of those. I'm going to be reading The Grandfathers Speak, Native American Folktales of the Lenape People. I live in Manhattan in New York City, and I live on what was Lenape land, so I went looking for a book by a Lenape author that I could read. At the time that this was put together, it was collected by the tribal chief of the Lenape people. It has stories from elders, and it has green on the cover, so it fits all of those challenges, as well as the fact that it has a lengthy introduction that is nonfiction. Like, for reference, this is the introduction and these are the stories. So there you go, lots of recommendations for Native American Heritage Month and Indigathon and my TBR. I hope you will join me. Let me know in the comments down below if you're planning on joining in and what you're going to be reading. For your question of the day, recommend a book by an indigenous author that you really loved. If you've read one that you want to recommend that you think people should check out, leave it in the comments down below. If you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time.